There seems to be a bit of a consensus among Dragon Ball Z fans that the series really went downhill after the defeat of Freeza. With some people saying that the Freeza arc should have just been the final arc and Dragon Ball should have just ended there. After that, the last two arcs, the Cell arc and the Majin Buu arc, aren't as well fondly remembered among a lot of other Dragon Ball fans. And even if you look at them completely objectively, they're not even as well written or as consistent as the other arcs. And while I appreciate that, I personally don't agree with people who say that the series should have ended after Frieza, because I personally find a lot of value in those last two arcs, the Cell arc especially, and I don't think they're as bad as people say they are. One problem with the last two arcs of the Dragon Ball Z is that they don't really have a single unifying theme or proper foreshadowing as to where the series was going to go. Like, say, the tournament in early Dragon Ball, they had very obvious themes which were eventually represented in the final matches of those tournaments. You had, Goku and Jackie Chan, and then you had Goku versus Tenshinhan, and then you had Goku versus Piccolo, and those kind of represented everything that was going on in the tournament. And even in sort of the Z era, the Saiyan and Frieza arcs started by introducing threats of the Saiyans and threats of Frieza, then explaining how those threats were connected to Goku, and eventually leading up to Goku fighting those threats and beating them. But say something like the Cell arc doesn't have anything like that. The first villain introduced in that arc is the return of Frieza, who gets easily killed by Trunks. Then they say the story is going to be about killer androids, only for the actual killer androids themselves to change once, then having a third one introduced, and in the end, the final villain, is technically introduced as an android, is more like a giant chimera monster, and nothing at all like the threat that Trunks was initially telling us at the start of the story. Now, there's an actual out-of-universe reason for that, and that is that Akira Toriyama's editors were really hard to please. There's a whole interview that Kanzenshuu translated, where Akira Toriyama explains that the changing of the final villains of the Cell arc from 19 and 20 to 17 and 18 to eventually Cell was all happened when his editors and former editors were dissatisfied with the designs of the final villains, thinking they just weren't menacing enough. So eventually Toriyama just had to keep making new villains until he finally came up with a design that everyone liked that was perfect Cell, and he ended up becoming the final villain at the end. Obviously, changing the villains 3 times during an arc makes the arc look a lot more like a jumbled mess with no real consistency or theme to it. But what I want to say, and what kind of triggered this video, was just sort of me realizing that I think that there is one consistent theme that does link all of these villains, even if it's kind of unintentional. That's that they are all the hero's fault. For one, every single one of the androids was made to kill Goku to take revenge against his destruction of the Red Ribbon Army. They all happened as a consequence of Goku's actions. Second of all, really importantly, the androids are allowed to be made by the heroes because they wanted to fight them. Even though Trunks explains that they kill everyone and almost wipe out humanity in their time, the heroes don't care. The thrill of a battle, and potentially trying to keep Vegeta on their side, is more important to them than the potential fate of the world. So they actually avoid the logical option and decide to just wait it out and train instead, hoping that that will be enough to beat them. And third, even after all the android stuff, Cell only manages to reach his perfect form and become such a large threat out of a combination of intentional and sometimes unintentional, really stupid decisions by Piccolo, Krillin, Trunks, 17, and Vegeta. Even Goku becomes guilty of stupid decisions by the end. It's what TV tropes would call an idiot plot. A conflict that can only arise by the main characters not using any sort of common sense at any given moment. In this case, the common sense is that Cell is a threat, so let's just try and do everything we can to beat him. No one ever really uses that option. So really, the biggest theme of the Cell arc is that the heroes are idiots. That sounds like a weird theme, and it actually kind of is. I'm not sure how intentional that theme is supposed to be, but surprisingly, it actually fits kind of alright with the themes of the sort of final battle of the arc. Because the other issue that people have with the Cell arc is that Gohan's ascension to main character feels like it kind of comes out of nowhere. Probably the first time we see hints that he might become important in this arc is the moment Goku takes him to train with him in the Room of Spirit of Time, and then claims that his intention is to try and make Gohan even stronger than him. But that's only about halfway through the arc. So people say, why is Gohan suddenly becoming the main character? What does that have to do with anything else that was going on in the arc beforehand? Gohan barely does anything this entire arc. He's so disconnected from Cell and the androids and the threat that was going on, and yet now we have to believe that he deserves to defeat Cell more than anyone else? To which I say, what if the reason why Gohan deserves to defeat Cell was precisely because he was so disconnected from the main story? Cell really epitomized all of the main characters' mistakes. No one in the cast could say that they didn't contribute to that threat, except for Gohan. While Gohan, say, never, protested letting the androids be built, you could kind of justify that he was about, 6 or 7 at that time, and all of the people he kind of hero worshipped were the people responsible for making that decision. After that, Gohan isn't responsible for any decision in the story until he fights Cell. And while that means he wasn't really contributing to help stop the androids, it also means he wasn't responsible for any of the mistakes that the other characters had made. He was like an outsider, someone who could look at this problem from a fresh perspective without any sort of Saiyan pride or desire for a good challenge and a fair fight clouding his judgment. When he gets sent out to fight Cell, he's not doing that for his pride or to improve himself like Goku and Vegeta. He fights Cell because, in his eyes, Cell is evil, and if he wins, he's going to destroy everyone he cares about, so he must be stopped. Even when Gohan hesitates, wondering if Cell is really so bad that he deserves to be destroyed, Cell doesn't let him take the easy way out of battle, because he tries to get Gohan angry to try and see his hidden power. He forces Gohan to get personally and seriously involved, and that leads to Cell's demise. It's almost like, say, those underdog sports teams movies. You know the ones where about this kind of failing team that can never win, only for a new transfer student or some kind of eccentric coach to show up, look at everything from a new perspective, and work out exactly what the team needs to do to get to the top. I mean, there's a lot of those in movies especially. The first one that comes to my mind for some reason is Pitch Perfect, but it happens a lot. So in this case, Cell, the epitome of the hero's flaws, is defeated by an essentially innocent child who's able to cut through all those issues of pride and the thrill of battle to see the Cell games for what they really are. A fight to the death to determine the fate of the planet, not a chance for just ego stroking. Now, this isn't to say Gohan is perfect. He also makes a mistake in that fight where he fails to finish off Cell due to his own power kind of taking control of him. But the difference is that mistake leads to consequences, that is, the death of Goku. And unlike other characters, Gohan actually learns his lesson and doesn't try to repeat that mistake. People say Cell's return from blowing himself up was kind of contrived, and okay, it sort of was, but I think it was something that really needed to happen. Cell needed to come back and stronger for Gohan to struggle against him and actually be able to win on his own terms. Gohan needed to prove that he was competent to finish the battle with his own power, not because of Cell just deciding to blow himself up. And in the final moments, Gohan ends up winning because of Vegeta attacking Cell from behind during that final beam struggle. Vegeta, the one perhaps most responsible for all of the conflicts in this arc. Vegeta redeeming himself and crucially saving the Earth with that one blast. So in the end, Cell is defeated by the innocence of a child combined with the characters' attempts to make up for all the mistakes they had made during that arc. I think this theme can also be used to explain the other major event at the end of the arc, and that is Goku deciding to remain dead for good, explaining that he thinks that the world is safer with him not around. Goku's decision makes sense on an obvious kind of meta level and on a thematic level. On a meta level, Goku is the main character, so if he dies, the story dies with him. Or rather, the very specific story of Goku that is Dragon Ball dies with him. If the story of Gohan was going to be any different, I'm not really sure. We didn't really get enough time to figure that out. And thematically, after all the problems Goku caused in that arc, letting the androids be built, sending his own son into combat without realizing that he'd be hesitant, giving Cell a senzu, of course the world would be safer off without him. We've seen the consequences of him being around firsthand. And without Goku, Vegeta wouldn't have a constant goal that was making him make rash decisions all the time. Basically, without Goku, there wouldn't be a person in the cast willing to let a threat appear for the sake of a good fight. Gohan as the protagonist could sufficiently stop that from happening, and stop stuff like the androids arc from happening in the first place. So maybe that was why it was that arc in particular where Toriyama decided to retire Goku's character, albeit briefly. Or maybe it was just an attempt to revitalize the series, we may never know. But that's how I find meaning in the Cell arc, by looking at it in this way. that the arc is just all about the flaws of the heroes and what happens when you don't try to fix those flaws. I know, you could say I'm reaching, none of these messages may be intentional at all, it's probably just a byproduct of crappy storytelling. But it's the kind of thing that gives me a newfound appreciation for the series. Just finding these kind of messages that might not even be intended, but can make the story feel a lot more meaningful and much more significant than it actually is. I mean, I think we all do it. This is basically my headcanon of the arc, of the messages in the arc. In the same way people headcanon about random unanswered questions in the series, and headcanon about power levels, there's nothing wrong with it. In fact, I think people do it all the time. So if you think I'm looking too deep into that, then sure, okay, maybe I am, but don't deny that you don't do the same things. I'm not even saying the arc is actually objectively better. This is just something I was thinking about the arc that gives me a lot more appreciation for it. Because at the end of the day, I want to appreciate this series. Not spend hours just nitpicking and complaining about every minute detail that isn't perfect. Dragon Ball's kind of like my problematic favorite. I know it's not perfect, or even that great in places, but that doesn't stop me from loving it. In fact, it makes me love it even more. Of course, this theory about the arc kind of has holes in it, the biggest holes being that these sort of ideas are directly contradicted by the time of the Majin Buu arc. But then again, I'm the kind of person who keeps saying that sometimes we should just appreciate this series for what it is at that given moment and not in a kind of retrospective way, because sometimes this stuff can be contradicted later on. But that doesn't mean that the stuff that you find value in doesn't have value immediately because it definitely doesn't mean anything. If I was just looking at a series purely from that perspective, then the Gohan Cell fight shouldn't even be interesting or important because it was just setting the way up for a main character who didn't end up becoming the main character in the end. But I still find it enjoyable because I enjoyed what it was at that moment and not for what it meant the next arc down the track. Anyway, yeah, this was a bit of a kind of rambling, rant, whatever. Actually, well, no, it wasn't even really a rant video because, you know, in rant videos you generally talk about stuff that you hate, and I was just talking about stuff that I loved, and things that I defend, and things that I think need to get a bit more love in the first place. So I guess to end this video off, I just want to say, you know, do you guys ever have stuff like this? I mean, do you like my little theory? And do you guys also have theories of your own? Like, this is the kind of thing where I say, like, if you guys want to write just like a mini essay in the comments, I am perfectly fine with that, and I might actually read it. If you know how to use paragraphs correctly, because I don't want to just read a literal wall of text. So yeah, this didn't really have a particular point other than I find meaning in the Cell arc. Maybe it's not as bad as some people say it is, and you can justify things with your headcanons if you really want to. I mean, obviously don't tell other people that your headcanons are correct, but you can still at least just explain them, I think. I think it just makes these things way more enjoyable. So this is Gabby, signing out, and goodbye guys.